In a flooded clay pit in eastern England, a researcher is holding something the size of a fingernail. It's a dull, metallic-looking stone. Fool's gold, iron pyrite. By itself, that's nothing. Pyrite is everywhere, except here. In this particular patch of Suffolk, pyrite doesn't naturally occur at all. Someone carried it in, 400,000 years ago. And once you understand why someone would carry a spark-making stone into a place that had none, the entire timeline of human fire changes. For decades, the accepted story went like this. Humans didn't master fire-making, striking sparks on command whenever they needed them, until around 50,000 years ago in late Neanderthal sites in northern France. Before that, any fire in the archaeological record could be explained away. Lightning strikes a tree, a wildfire sweeps through, ash and charcoal look the same whether nature lit the match or a person did. That's the core problem fire leaves for archaeologists. It's one of the hardest technologies to prove, because it's one of the easiest to fake by accident. So when a two-fragment sliver of pyrite turned up at a place called Barnham, in a landscape with no natural pyrite deposits, scientists had a decision to make. Was this really evidence of deliberate fire-making? And if it was, what did it mean that it happened 350,000 years earlier than anyone had proven before? Barnham sits in a quiet patch of woodland between the English towns of Thetford and Bury St. Edmunds, inside a disused clay pit that's been known to archaeologists since the early 1900s. Buried under layers of ancient pond sediment, it preserves a snapshot from a warm interglacial period roughly 400,000 years ago, a time when the people living in Britain were most likely early Neanderthals, based on skeletal remains of similar age found at Swanscombe in Kent and at Atapuerca in Spain. Sediment is the hero of this story. Most fire evidence disappears. Charcoal scatters. Ash blows away or gets churned up by rain and roots. But Barnum's clay and pond layers sealed everything in place almost undisturbed, like a time capsule nobody was supposed to find. Inside that capsule, a team led by the British Museum, working with University College London, the Natural History Museum, Leiden University, and several other institutions, spent years quietly pulling out fragments. 3, in particular, would end up in a Nature paper published in December 2025. And together they read less like a random pile of old rocks and more like evidence laid out for a jury. Exhibit 1. The hearth. Buried in the old clay was a patch of reddened, hardened earth. Clay that had clearly been baked, not just discolored. Heat does something specific to clay minerals. It changes their structure in ways that can be measured. This wasn't a smear of ash that could have drifted in from somewhere else. It was fired in place. Something hot had sat directly on this exact spot, long enough to cook the ground beneath it. On its own, this is suggestive. It's not proof. A century of archaeology has taught researchers to be suspicious of a single burnt patch. Wildfires bake soil too. So the case needed corroborating evidence. And the site delivered. Exhibit 2. The tools. Scattered near the hearth were flint handaxes, but not ordinary ones. These were heat-shattered. Flint that's been through intense, sustained heat fractures in a distinctive way, leaving telltale crazing and pot-lid fractures across the surface. Wildfires can scorch stone tools lying on the surface, sure, but these axes weren't just scorched. The damage pattern matched tools that had been close to or even used near, a maintained fire, not a fire that swept past once and moved on. Now the picture was tightening, a baked patch of ground and stone tools damaged by real, sustained heat, sitting together in the same undisturbed layer. Two pieces of evidence pointing the same direction. But the team still needed something that couldn't be explained by any natural fire at all, something that could only mean intention. Exhibit 3. The pyrite. This is where the story turns from maybe to almost certainly. In 2017, and again later in the excavation, researchers found 2 small fragments of iron pyrite in the same layer as the hearth and the shattered axes. Pyrite is the mineral that gives off sharp, hot sparks when struck against something hard, like flint. Strike them together correctly, direct the spark into dry tinder, and you have fire on command, not fire by luck. Here's the detail that turns this from interesting to airtight. Pyrite doesn't naturally occur anywhere near Barnham. Researchers checked. It isn't in the local geology. Somebody brought it there from somewhere else, carried it deliberately, the same way you might carry a lighter in your pocket today. You don't carry a spark-making stone into a place with no natural pyrite unless you already know exactly what it's for. That's the moment the case closes. A baked hearth, fire-shattered tools, an imported fire-starting mineral with no natural explanation for its presence. 3 separate lines of evidence, all converging on the same conclusion, all sitting in the same 400,000-year-old layer of undisturbed ground. Here's what makes this more than just older fire evidence. Researchers already knew fire was important to human groups living in Europe between about 500,000 and 400,000 years ago. Sites in the UK, France, and Portugal show growing evidence that fire mattered to them. What nobody could explain was why it suddenly became so important during that window. Barnham may be the answer. It doesn't just push a date back, it offers a mechanism. Before Barnham, human groups likely depended on fire they didn't start, catching a spark from a lightning-struck tree, then trying to keep it alive, feed it, protect it from rain, carry embers between camps. That's fragile. Lose the flame, and you're back in the dark and the cold until the next lightning storm obliges you. Barnum suggests that around 400,000 years ago, at least one group of early Neanderthals broke that dependency entirely. They didn't need luck anymore. They understood which stone struck sparks, which tinder caught those sparks, and they were willing to carry the raw materials with them in advance before they needed them. That's not opportunism. That's planning for a need that hasn't happened yet. A genuinely modern piece of cognition running through the hands of a species most people still picture as primitive. So, did fire making really get pushed back 350,000 years by two tiny stones in a British clay pit? Yes. The combined evidence, a baked hearth, heat-fractured tools, and pyrite with no local source, gives researchers their strongest case yet for deliberate, on-demand fire-making at 400,000 years old, roughly 350,000 years earlier than the previous best documented example, from Neanderthal sites in France dated to about 50,000 years ago. It's the earliest solid evidence for this technology found anywhere in the world so far. Researchers are careful about what they can't yet claim. No animal bones survived at the site, so there's no direct proof of cooking. No human remains were found there either, so scientists are inferring the firemakers were early Neanderthals from other skeletal evidence nearby in Britain and Spain, not from bones at Barnham itself. What they were using the fire for, warmth, cooking, protection, or simply gathering, remains an open, honest question the researchers themselves haven't settled. But the core claim that someone at Barnham could strike a spark whenever they chose to stands on evidence strong enough to convince a leading nature journal, and strong enough to move a species most people think of as barely there technologically firmly into the category of forward planners. Somewhere in a Suffolk clay pit, a person who died 400,000 years ago made one small deliberate choice. Pick up this stone, not that one, and bring it with you. They couldn't have known that choice would survive them by 4,000 centuries, or that it would end up rewriting a chapter of human history in a scientific journal. It raises a quieter question the researchers haven't answered yet, and maybe can't, not from this site alone. If this group had already solved fire on demand 400,000 years ago, were they the first to figure it out anywhere on Earth? Or is Barnum simply the first place where the evidence happened to survive, and the real answer is still buried, waiting in some other patch of undisturbed ground we haven't dug up yet? If stories like this, the ones hiding in the smallest, easiest to miss physical clues, are the kind you want more of, there's a subscribe button right there for next time.